The 2022 academic year is well underway, and the Zero Dropout Campaign is warning of factors that make learners more likely to drop out of school. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, has seen a rise in learners not attending school, and they may have decided to stay away permanently. Now, according to the organization, even before the pandemic, about 40% of learners who started school in grade 1 do not complete matric. Joining us now to talk about this is Rahima Essop. She is from the organization Zero Dropout Campaign. Ms. Essop, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting research you have done here, but on the face of it, what makes a learner make the decision to drop out of school?
Well, this is the really interesting question, and we are hoping that the research and findings contained in this new report titled School Dropout, Gender Matters will help to change perceptions about why learners are dropping out of school and who is dropping out of school, so that we can build more responsive systems, policies and programs. We know that there is no single risk factor that can be used to accurately predict dropout or who is at risk of dropping out, but there are over 36 risk factors, for example. Given what we know, that dropout is a process of disengagement caused by a convergence of risk factors at home, at school, and in communities, we're able to change perceptions about who is dropping out, because in the popular imagination, poorly, a dropout is often thought of as lazy or irresponsible or simply not interested in school. But that is not what we have found. Often learners are very committed to their schooling, but they are pushed or pulled away from school because of these disruptive factors in their lives and are caught up in cycles of grade repetition, and after a long struggle of being in school and not getting the support that they need, they end up dropping out. A really interesting fact that is contained in our report is that among learners who are in grade 10 and 12, 20% of them are 3 or more years over age. Now, what that tells you is that many learners are getting caught in a cycle of grade repetition. Yeah.
Let's talk about the push and pull factors that you have pointed to. And I'm going to ask you to stay away from the gender element just yet, because I want us to deal with that a little later. But the push and pull factors, you point to an intersection of gender with social inequalities, which include race, geography, and household income. All of these are likely to shape the learner's experience in the schooling environment. Why are these factors so important?
Well, Kole, we need to take a holistic view. Dropout is multidimensional, and as I mentioned, there's no single risk factor that can accurately predict that a learner is going to drop out. In examining all of these different risk factors in our report, we looked at how a learner's gender intersects with other social inequalities, as you mentioned, to shape their experience of school and to shape their disengagement from school. We looked at these factors both globally and locally. For instance, teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, disciplinary climates at schools, grade repetition, as I mentioned, and much more. This is not an extensive list, of course, as the report is about 100 pages long and is packed with far more detail and nuance. But these are some interesting issues that I can talk about right now.
Yeah. All right. So let's come to that all-important question. And based on the research that you've done, which gender between a boy child and a girl child is more prone to dropping out of school?
Well, this report looks at all genders. But because of the available data being mostly for boys and girls, we had to look at the binary spectrum or consider the data along this binary spectrum. And we found that boys have a repetition rate that is 50% larger than that of girls, particularly in under-resourced communities. Relative to girls, boys are underperforming across all grades and are more likely to drop out before completing matric. Over the last 10 years, for instance, young men have constituted a declining proportion of the number of learners who sit and write their matric exams. And we saw that this year as well. So serious is the problem, Toli, that the Department of Basic Education, in its own strategic documents, has called for, quote-unquote, improvement strategies to pay, quote-unquote, careful attention to the high rates of dropout among boys. So this isn't a new problem. It has been going on for quite some time. It's a pre-pandemic problem, and that's something that we have to remember, that before the pandemic, dropout was a hidden crisis. What the pandemic has done is brought this crisis to the fore. Now, any strategy that is put into place must be context-specific. It must be intentional and grounded in evidence about learners' realities, and must take into consideration the various risk factors, much of which are highlighted in our new report. Yeah,
I'll ask you in a moment about what the homework is for policymakers, someone like Angie Motshekga, for example. But before that, the long-term effects of dropping out of school. Your report makes a very interesting observation about the majority of South Africans who hold a matric certificate versus those who do not hold a matric certificate in terms of employment statistics or unemployment statistics.
Yes. So as an advocacy campaign, what we want people to realize is that dropout is not the problem of the individual or their family. Dropout is everyone's problem. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when you have learners who do not have a matric certificate, they are more likely to form part of the unemployed youth. And we know that youth unemployment is a big problem in our country. So dropout contributes to public health concerns, it contributes to socio-economic issues, and it contributes to economic problems in the country as well. So we all need to do something to prevent dropout, and we can. It's not only a matter for Minister Angie Motshekga and her department to deal with. Yes, absolutely, they need to lead. They need to lead, and they need to start with strong policy decisions. However, we can all do our part. You and I, Toli, parents at home can all do their part if we begin to accept that dropout is a process of disengagement, and that if we can preempt and prevent disengagement, we may be able to retain learners in our system, in the schooling system.
Very briefly then, are there any specific things that can be done in the immediate by policymakers in terms of developing prevention methods that are context specific?
Absolutely. Even though dropout is a complex problem, it's a multidimensional problem, there are simple solutions, believe it or not. At a national government level, the basic education sector must make dropout prevention an explicit goal of our schooling system. And we can do that by making dropout a KPI. Last week, the matric results were released. The matric results are a KPI for the sector. If dropout were a KPI, then we would be more intentionally collecting data on dropout and explicitly working towards the prevention of dropout. We also need to build into schooling, we also need to build early warning systems to be able to preempt and prevent dropout. But the only way we can really do that is if we collect accurate, real-time, learner-level data. And that's one of the problems that we have in our schooling system, is the quality of data that is available, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to give to get an accurate handle on what the dropout rate is at the moment, especially since the pandemic, which has seen so many learners out of school. And finally, we need to increase and strengthen psychosocial support services at schools. Because learners who are at risk of dropping out, who do show signs of disengagement, and there are indicators that point to these signs of disengagement, that they are absenteeism, behavioral concerns, as well as academic performance. And when we're able to divert those learners to the right psychosocial support services, we may be able to prevent them from dropping out.
Rahima Essop, thank you very much for those insights. She is with the organization Zero Dropout Campaign.